During World War II, the Allied forces were faced with a monumental challenge, supplying their rapidly advancing troops across the vast European theater. The Germans, long regarded for their effective military logistics, scoffed at the United States' ability to sustain a prolonged campaign, particularly as the Allies made their way through France after the D-Day invasion in June 1944. The Germans were confident that the logistical bottlenecks the Allies would face would be their downfall, yet the Red Ball Express proved to be one of the most crucial factors in the success of General Patton's Third Army and the liberation of Europe. Initially, the Germans underestimated the scale and effectiveness of U.S. logistics. They believed that the Allies would struggle to maintain their momentum, hampered by long supply lines and insufficient resources. The Wehrmacht had long prided itself on its ability to maintain efficient logistical operations, utilizing a well-established system of railroads, road networks, and supply depots that could move troops and equipment swiftly to the front. They expected that the Allies, lacking the same level of coordination and infrastructure, would falter under the strain of their own supply chain. However, what the Germans failed to anticipate was the innovation and determination of the United States Army, particularly the logistics teams that were responsible for ensuring that troops were well supplied, equipped, and ready for battle. The Red Ball Express, a massive convoy system designed to transport vital supplies from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines, was the answer to the logistical problem the Allies faced. The Red Ball Express was a logistical marvel. Comprised of thousands of African-American truck drivers, the convoys moved supplies around the clock, sometimes covering hundreds of miles a day. They transported everything from ammunition and food to fuel and medical supplies, all of which were essential to the continued success of the Allied forces. Despite facing numerous challenges, including long hours, treacherous roads, and constant threat of German air and ground attacks, the Red Ball Express kept General Patton's army moving forward at a remarkable pace. Patton, known for his aggressive tactics and rapid advances, benefited greatly from the Red Ball Express. As his Third Army pushed eastward, capturing towns and cities in its path, the relentless flow of supplies ensured that his forces remained combat-ready. The logistical support provided by the Red Ball Express allowed Patton to execute his blitzkrieg-style tactics effectively, overwhelming German defenses and preventing the Wehrmacht from regrouping. The success of the Red Ball Express was not only a testament to the resilience and skill of the drivers, but also to the ingenuity of the U.S. military in adapting to the challenges of modern warfare. While the Germans may have initially laughed at the prospect of U.S. logistical success, they soon realized that the Red Ball Express was a game changer. The convoys kept Patton's army supplied and allowed the Allies to maintain the momentum of their advance, leading to a swift and decisive victory in the European theater. Logistics is often referred to as the unsung hero of warfare. While much attention is given to the tactics and heroism displayed on the front lines, the logistical operations that sustain an army are equally crucial. In the case of World War II, logistics became a critical component of the Allied success, especially after the D-Day invasion in 1944. The Allies' ability to keep their forces well supplied, equipped, and operational was a major factor in their eventual victory over the Axis powers. Without effective logistics, the rapid advances made by armies like General Patton's Third Army would have been impossible to sustain. At its core, Logistics refers to the planning, coordination, and movement of supplies, equipment, and personnel to where they are needed most. In wartime, logistics involves not just feeding and equipping soldiers, but also providing them with ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, and reinforcements. The importance of logistics was understood by the military leaders on both sides of the conflict. But it was especially important for the Allies, who faced the challenge of operating far from home, across vast distances, and with limited infrastructure in place. One of the biggest logistical challenges faced by the Allied forces was ensuring that their armies could continue to move forward after the success of the D-Day landings in June 1944. Once the beaches of Normandy were secured, the Allies were faced with the difficult task of supplying the thousands of soldiers advancing through France and later into Germany with the necessary resources to maintain their offensive. The road to Berlin, as it would be, would not be paved with just weapons and soldiers. It would require a steady stream of supplies to keep the armies operational. In addition to the challenge of distance and terrain, the Allies had to contend with the threat of enemy interference. The Germans had heavily fortified the French countryside, and their military leaders were well versed in disrupting supply lines. The Wehrmacht's expertise in logistics had been a key factor in their early successes during the war, and they had long relied on railroads and roads to transport troops and equipment to wherever they were needed. The Germans believed that the Allies, without a well-organized system in place, would falter under the strain of maintaining their supply lines. What the Germans did not anticipate, however, was the adaptability and ingenuity of the American military. While the Allies lacked the established infrastructure that the Germans had built over years of conquest, they had something equally important: the willingness to innovate. The creation of the Red Ball Express became one of the most successful logistical operations in military history. The Red Ball Express was a system of supply convoys that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, bringing vital supplies from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines in France. The convoys were made up of thousands of trucks, many of them driven by African-American soldiers who had been assigned to the task. These drivers faced long hours on treacherous roads, often under the threat of German air raids or attacks from enemy ground forces. Despite these obstacles, the Red Ball Express was a success, moving millions of tons of supplies across the battlefield, often covering hundreds of miles in a single day. The strategic importance of the Red Ball Express lay not just in the volume of supplies it transported, but in the speed and efficiency with which it operated. The convoys allowed the Allies to maintain a continuous flow of resources to their troops, preventing any significant logistical bottlenecks. Without this system, the rapid advances made by the Allied forces in 1944 would have been impossible to sustain. General Patton's Third Army, for example, was able to keep up its momentum thanks to the constant flow of supplies, which enabled Patton to continue his aggressive blitzkrieg-style tactics. Patton's ability to move swiftly and decisively through France was directly linked to the logistical support provided by the Red Ball Express. For the Germans, the effectiveness of the Red Ball Express was a major shock. They had underestimated the ability of the United States to establish and maintain such an efficient supply line. The Germans, who had long prided themselves on their own logistical capabilities, could not match the scale or speed of the Red Ball Express. As the convoys continued to push supplies forward, German generals were forced to rethink their assumptions about the Allies' logistical abilities. The Red Ball Express was a reminder that the true power of an army lies not just in its firepower or tactics, but in its ability to sustain itself in the field. The importance of logistics in warfare is evident in the outcome of World War II. The Allies' ability to supply their forces in the field allowed them to maintain the pressure on the Axis, eventually leading to their victory. The Red Ball Express, as one of the most successful logistics operations in history, played a key role in this success. It is a testament to the strategic importance of logistics that, while the battles may have been fought on the front lines, the true victory often lies in the unseen work of the logisticians who make it all possible. At the outset of World War II, the German military maintained a commanding position over logistics in Europe. They had perfected the art of military supply chains during their rapid advances across the continent, and their logistical expertise was one of the driving forces behind their early successes. The Germans had a robust system of railroads, trucks, and depots that allowed them to maintain a steady flow of resources to the front lines, even as they pushed deeper into enemy territory. Their understanding of the importance of logistics in warfare was unmatched, and they viewed it as a cornerstone of their military success. When the United States entered the war, there was skepticism in German military circles regarding the American ability to maintain such an effective logistical operation. The Germans believed that the United States, with its relatively inexperienced military, would struggle to sustain the demands of modern warfare, especially when it came to managing long supply lines in a European theater that was far removed from the U.S. homeland. They were confident that the Allies, despite their superior numbers and resources, would falter under the strain of maintaining an effective supply chain. This skepticism was rooted in the perception that the U.S. military lacked the organization and precision required to manage logistics at such a large scale. The Germans, who had relied on their well-established systems and infrastructure, viewed the American logistical capabilities as rudimentary, especially compared to the German model, which was based on years of operational experience. They believed that the United States, with its diverse and often uncoordinated supply systems, would face significant difficulties in ensuring that its forces were adequately equipped and supplied. One of the key points of German skepticism was the belief that the United States would struggle with transportation. While the Germans had a vast rail network that allowed them to move supplies efficiently, the U.S. military did not have the same infrastructure in Europe. The Germans predicted that the Allies would encounter bottlenecks as they attempted to transport goods by road, and they believed that this would slow the pace of the Allied advance and give the Wehrmacht time to regroup and counterattack. Moreover, the Germans saw the U.S. military's reliance on trucks and convoys as an inefficient method of transporting supplies. In their view, trucks were slow and vulnerable to attack, especially in the face of German air superiority. The Germans believed that the United States would quickly run into problems with fuel and ammunition shortages, which would severely hamper their ability to keep up the pressure on the front lines. However, the German generals severely underestimated the resourcefulness and ingenuity of the U.S. military. While the American logistical system was indeed less experienced, the United States rapidly adapted to the challenges posed by the European theater. American generals and logistics planners realizing the limitations of their infrastructure, began to implement creative solutions to move supplies across the battlefield. One of the most successful solutions was the creation of the Red Ball Express, a system of convoys that moved supplies from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines. The creation of the Red Ball Express was a direct response to the logistical challenges the Allies faced in Europe. The convoy system allowed the U.S. Army to bypass the limitations of the European rail network and instead rely on a fleet of trucks to transport supplies directly to the front. The speed and efficiency with which the Red Ball Express operated shocked the Germans, who were unprepared for the logistical prowess the United States would demonstrate. The skepticism that German generals held toward U.S. logistics was not just a matter of underestimating the technical capabilities of the Americans, but also a failure to appreciate the strategic importance of logistics in modern warfare. The Germans had long relied on their ability to move forces quickly and efficiently, but they did not fully grasp that the true strength of an army lies in its ability to sustain itself over time. The United States logistical operations, particularly the Red Ball Express, allowed the Allies to maintain their momentum and keep up the pressure on the German forces. The German underestimation of U.S. logistics was a critical miscalculation that contributed to the ultimate failure of the Wehrmacht in the war. The inability of the Germans to disrupt the Allies' supply lines, despite their early advantages, played a significant role in the collapse of the German military machine. As the Allies pushed further into France and eventually into Germany, the German generals were forced to confront the reality that the logistical prowess of the U.S. military was not something they could easily overcome. The creation of the Red Ball Express was a direct response to the logistical difficulties that the Allied forces faced after the success of the D-Day landings in June 1944. Once the beaches of Normandy had been secured, the Allied forces, particularly the U.S. Army, were faced with the daunting task of supplying their rapidly advancing troops. The need for a robust and efficient supply line was immediate, and the Allies needed a system that could transport the necessary resources: fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, food, and more across the battlefield, from the coast to the front lines. The Red Ball Express was designed to address these logistical challenges by creating a dedicated convoy system that ran continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The goal was to keep supplies moving efficiently and quickly to the troops on the front lines, particularly to General Patton's Third Army, which was making rapid advances across France. The Red Ball Express was named after the red ball symbol that marked the trucks in the convoy, which became a symbol of the vital role that these logistics operations played in the success of the Allied campaign. The Red Ball Express was not just a simple network of trucks moving supplies. It was an intricate system of organization and coordination. The convoys operated on a strict timetable, with trucks departing at regular intervals from the port of Cherbourg and other supply depots along the coast. The trucks followed a designated route that stretched for hundreds of miles, heading directly to the front lines where the supplies were desperately needed. One of the unique aspects of the Red Ball Express was its use of African-American soldiers. The U.S. Army had a segregated structure at the time, and the majority of the drivers on the Red Ball Express were African Americans, many of whom were members of the 510th, 514th, and 555th Truck Regiments. These soldiers faced tremendous challenges, driving long hours on dangerous roads, navigating treacherous terrain, and constantly being exposed to the threat of German attacks. Despite these hardships, they performed their duties with remarkable efficiency, ensuring that the Allies maintained a steady flow of supplies. The structure of the Red Ball Express was not without its challenges. The routes that the trucks took were often poorly paved or even non-existent, and the convoys had to travel through areas that were still under German control or were subject to regular aerial bombardment. Drivers faced the constant threat of ambush, especially as the Germans attempted to disrupt the supply lines through air raids or ground attacks. Despite this, the Red Ball Express drivers continued to operate under extreme conditions, ensuring that Patton's forces had the resources they needed to continue their aggressive advance. The convoy system was also designed to maximize efficiency. The trucks followed a one-way route, with the vehicles moving in a constant flow, which minimized the risk of traffic jams or delays. The convoy system was structured so that drivers would pick up their loads at designated points, head to their assigned drop-off areas, and return to base for the next load. The process was continuous, ensuring that there was no break in the supply chain. The scale of the Red Ball Express was extraordinary. At its peak, the operation consisted of more than 6,000 trucks and drivers, with the convoys moving millions of tons of supplies over hundreds of miles. The system was designed to keep up with the rapid pace of the Allied advance, which was necessary to maintain the momentum of the offensive. The Red Ball Express became a symbol of the logistical capabilities of the U.S. Army, and its success was a key factor in the overall success of the Allied forces in Europe. In addition to its scale, the Red Ball Express also demonstrated the adaptability and ingenuity of the U.S. military. The convoy system was a solution to a problem that had not been fully anticipated: how to keep an army supplied as it moved through enemy territory. The success of the Red Ball Express was a testament to the American military's ability to adapt to the challenges of modern warfare, proving that logistics could be as decisive as tactics on the battlefield. The role of American truck drivers in the Red Ball Express was pivotal to its success, yet their contributions have often been overlooked in mainstream accounts of the operation. The U.S. Army during World War II was segregated, and the majority of the truck drivers in the Red Ball Express were African American soldiers, many of whom were part of the 510th, 514th, and 555th Truck Regiments. These regiments were assigned the daunting task of ensuring that critical supplies, including ammunition, fuel, food, and medical supplies, were transported from the ports in Normandy to the advancing Allied front lines. The African American soldiers in the Red Ball Express were given a responsibility that few had anticipated. They were essential to the rapid advance of General Patton's Third Army and the Allied forces across France. Their role was crucial because without the steady stream of supplies that the Red Ball Express facilitated, the Allied forces would have struggled to maintain their offensive, potentially stalling the liberation of Western Europe. Despite the critical importance of their work, African American soldiers in the Red Ball Express faced numerous challenges. First and foremost was the inherent risk of the mission. The convoys had to travel through areas where German forces were still present, and the trucks were often vulnerable to aerial bombardment or ground attacks. German fighters and bombers regularly targeted supply convoys, knowing that disrupting the Allies' supply lines could have a devastating impact on their operations. Drivers were also at risk of ambush by German ground forces, especially as they ventured further into France. In addition to the external dangers, the African-American drivers also faced internal struggles within the segregated U.S. military. The discrimination and segregation that were prevalent in American society at the time were mirrored within the military, and the truck drivers of the Red Ball Express were often subjected to racial prejudice from their fellow soldiers. Despite these challenges, the African-American drivers remained dedicated to their mission, proving their ability, resilience, and commitment to the success of the Allied forces. Their contribution went beyond mere transportation. The drivers of the Red Ball Express were tasked with moving vast quantities of supplies under extreme conditions. The roads were often treacherous, poorly maintained, and clogged with traffic, but the truck drivers continued to push forward, working long hours with little rest. Many drivers worked around the clock, often driving through the night, and the convoys were designed to operate continuously. This relentless schedule ensured that supplies reached the front lines without interruption, which was critical to the success of the Allied offensive. The importance of the African-American drivers was recognized by their commanders, who praised their skill and determination. The logistics officers overseeing the Red Ball Express were deeply impressed by the drivers' ability to navigate the dangerous roads of France, especially when dealing with inclement weather, damaged infrastructure, and the constant threat of enemy attack. It was their ability to keep the supply lines open and moving efficiently that enabled General Patton's forces to maintain their aggressive pace through France and eventually into Germany. While the efforts of the African-American truck drivers were crucial, their contributions were not fully acknowledged at the time. The segregated nature of the U.S. Army meant that these men often did not receive the recognition they deserved, even though they were central to the success of the operation. However, in the years following the war, there was a growing recognition of their role in the Allied victory. Their bravery and skill were celebrated by the African-American community, and in recent years, efforts have been made to ensure that their contributions are more widely acknowledged in the history of World War II. The Red Ball Express was not just a logistical success, it was also a milestone in the integration of African-American soldiers into key military roles. The performance of the African-American truck drivers in the Red Ball Express helped to challenge the prevailing racial stereotypes of the time. Their professionalism and dedication demonstrated that African-American soldiers were just as capable as their white counterparts, and their success in the Red Ball Express played a role in the broader efforts to desegregate the U.S. military in the years following the war. Ultimately, the African-American truck drivers of the Red Ball Express were integral to the success of the Allied forces in Europe. Their contributions were a vital part of the logistical effort that enabled General Patton and his army to maintain the momentum of their rapid advance, and without their dedication and hard work, the Allied victory in Europe may have been much harder to achieve. The challenges faced by the drivers of the Red Ball Express were immense and multifaceted, testing both their physical endurance and mental resilience. These brave men, many of whom were African-American soldiers, became a vital cog in the machine that fueled the Allied forces' rapid advance through France and into Germany. But their work was far from easy, as they encountered numerous obstacles that could have halted or severely disrupted the operation. Despite these hardships, the drivers persevered, and their efforts were critical to the success of the Allied campaign. One of the most significant challenges the Red Ball Express drivers faced was the sheer scale of the operation. The convoys were tasked with moving millions of tons of supplies over hundreds of miles, often in harsh conditions. The trucks were the primary means of transport, as the Allies had little access to an effective rail network that could handle such large volumes of materials across the war-torn French countryside. The trucks were also often poorly equipped for the terrain, which included narrow, unpaved roads, steep hills, and deep mud. Despite these conditions, the drivers continued to deliver supplies on a tight schedule. The roads themselves posed another significant challenge. Many of the routes used by the Red Ball Express were either damaged or completely destroyed by the ongoing conflict. German forces had sabotaged roads, bridges, and tunnels in an attempt to hinder the Allies' progress. These poor road conditions made the convoys vulnerable to delays, accidents, and damage to the trucks, as well as to the constant threat of attack by enemy forces. Navigating through a landscape littered with obstacles required extraordinary skill and caution from the drivers, who had to constantly adjust to changing conditions and hazards. Another major challenge was the constant threat of enemy attack. While the drivers of the Red Ball Express were tasked with transporting supplies, they also had to do so under the shadow of German military presence. The Germans frequently launched air raids on supply convoys, using fighter planes and bombers to target the trucks as they moved across open roads. These attacks were meant to disrupt the Allied supply chain and slow the advance of the forces on the front lines. In addition to air raids, the convoys were also vulnerable to ambushes by German ground forces. Despite these threats, the drivers of the Red Ball Express continued to drive through dangerous territories, knowing that their mission was critical to the success of the war effort. Weather also played a major role in complicating the drivers' tasks. The fall and winter of 1944 were particularly harsh, and the drivers faced heavy rain, freezing temperatures, and even snow in some areas. These weather conditions made the already difficult roads even more treacherous. Mudslides, floods, and snowstorms all contributed to the challenges faced by the Red Ball Express drivers. Vehicles often got stuck, and the drivers had to find creative solutions to keep the convoys moving forward. The physical demands of the job were intense. Red Ball Express drivers were required to work long hours, sometimes driving for 16 or more hours a day, often with little rest. The constant pressure to keep the convoys moving and meet supply deadlines meant that the drivers had to push their bodies to the limit. Sleep was scarce, and many of the drivers were exhausted by the constant workload. The lack of rest and the grueling pace of the operation took a toll on their physical and mental health. Drivers often experienced fatigue, muscle strain, and even injuries from the repetitive nature of the job. Mental fatigue was also a significant challenge. The stress of navigating dangerous roads, while constantly being aware of the possibility of attack, created a high level of anxiety among the drivers. The weight of responsibility, knowing that the success of the operation relied on their ability to deliver supplies to the front lines, was a constant pressure. Many of the drivers were aware that the fate of their fellow soldiers depended on their ability to transport vital supplies on time. This pressure, combined with the ever present threat of death or injury, made their work incredibly taxing mentally and emotionally. Additionally, the drivers had to work with limited resources. The trucks used in the Red Ball Express were often old and prone to breakdowns, and spare parts were in short supply. Drivers had to improvise and repair their vehicles as best as they could, using whatever materials they could find. If a truck broke down, the driver was often left stranded in hostile territory, facing the danger of attack or the possibility of being delayed for hours. Despite these obstacles, the drivers continued to do their best, keeping the convoys running and ensuring that the supply lines remained open. Despite these immense challenges, the drivers of the Red Ball Express achieved remarkable success. Their ability to adapt, overcome obstacles, and maintain the supply lines under the harshest conditions was a testament to their dedication, resourcefulness, and determination. The Red Ball Express played a critical role in the success of the Allied forces, ensuring that General Patton's Third Army and the broader Allied effort had the supplies they needed to continue their advance. Without the bravery and hard work of the Red Ball Express drivers, the Allies would have been unable to maintain the momentum of their offensive, and the war's outcome might have been different. The Red Ball Express played a pivotal role in enabling General George S. Patton's Third Army to maintain its aggressive momentum during the rapid advance across France in 1944. Patton's military tactics were built on speed and surprise, emphasizing fast, decisive movements that sought to outflank and overwhelm enemy forces. These tactics were highly effective, but they relied heavily on the ability to keep his army well supplied with fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies, resources that were essential to sustaining the offensive. Before the establishment of the Red Ball Express, the logistical challenges of supplying Patton's forces were immense. As his army pushed deeper into France, it often found itself operating far ahead of the rest of the Allied forces, creating long and vulnerable supply lines. The Germans had long understood the importance of logistics, and they had sabotaged key transportation routes in an effort to disrupt the Allied supply chain. Patton, known for his relentless and rapid advances, faced a significant risk of being stalled if his supply lines could not keep pace with the speed of his attack. The Red Ball Express, a system of continuous truck convoys moving supplies from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines, became the critical solution to this logistical bottleneck. The convoys were able to deliver supplies at a rapid pace, often covering hundreds of miles a day, and ensuring that Patton's army remained well supplied even as it advanced through enemy territory. This constant flow of resources was vital to keeping Patton's forces fueled and combat ready, allowing them to maintain the speed and aggression that were central to his military tactics. The direct impact of the Red Ball Express on Patton's tactics can be seen in the way it facilitated the rapid, large-scale offensive operations that characterized his style of warfare. Patton's Third Army relied heavily on the ability to advance quickly, often bypassing heavily defended positions and striking at the heart of the enemy's supply and communication lines. However, to make these swift maneuvers possible, Patton needed uninterrupted access to essential supplies: fuel to power the tanks and trucks, ammunition to sustain combat operations, and food and medical supplies to keep his soldiers healthy and effective. With the Red Ball Express, Patton's forces were able to keep up the pressure on the Germans. The logistical support provided by the convoys ensured that Patton's Third Army could continue its aggressive advance toward Germany without being slowed by supply shortages. For example, as Patton pushed eastward after the breakout from Normandy, the availability of supplies allowed his army to engage in lightning-fast maneuvers, surrounding German forces and forcing them to retreat before they could mount an effective counterattack. The ability to keep such a large and mobile force well supplied was critical to the success of these operations. The effectiveness of the Red Ball Express was also evident in the way it enabled Patton to launch surprise offensives. Patton's military doctrine emphasized unpredictability and the element of surprise, and the Red Ball Express allowed him to move his forces quickly and strike where the enemy least expected it. Without a constant flow of supplies, such rapid and unpredictable movements would have been impossible. The convoys ensured that Patton's army could keep pace with his fast-moving tactics, giving him the logistical advantage he needed to maintain the initiative on the battlefield. Moreover, the Red Ball Express helped to alleviate the strain on other logistical systems. With the Allies advancing across France, traditional supply routes were becoming overburdened, and the risk of supply shortages grew. The Red Ball Express relieved some of this pressure by providing a dedicated, high-capacity supply route that kept Patton's army well stocked and ready to continue its march. This allowed other parts of the Allied forces to focus on different fronts, knowing that the Third Army's supply needs were being met without taking away from their own resources. Another impact of the Red Ball Express on Patton's tactics was its ability to enable him to keep up with his strategic vision. Patton had a clear goal of quickly advancing toward Germany, cutting off enemy forces and liberating territory. The Red Ball Express was integral to this vision, as it provided the logistical backbone that allowed Patton's forces to stay ahead of the Germans. It also allowed Patton to engage in large-scale operations, such as the Battle of the Bulge, where maintaining the flow of supplies was crucial to sustaining the counteroffensive against the Germans. The success of these operations would not have been possible without the logistical support provided by the Red Ball Express. Patton's reliance on the Red Ball Express also showcased the importance of logistics in modern warfare. While many generals before him had focused primarily on battlefield tactics, Patton understood that without a robust logistical system, even the most brilliant strategies would fail. By recognizing the vital role that logistics played in his success, Patton was able to integrate supply chains into his tactical planning, ensuring that his forces could operate at peak efficiency. The Red Ball Express also highlighted the adaptability and resourcefulness of the U.S. military. Patton's aggressive tactics were often seen as unconventional, but the success of the Red Ball Express proved that the U.S. Army could adapt quickly to the challenges of modern warfare. Despite facing logistical hurdles that the Germans had not anticipated, the Allies were able to overcome these difficulties by creating a system that could keep pace with their rapid advances. In conclusion, the Red Ball Express was an essential component of General Patton's military tactics during World War II. It provided the logistical support necessary to sustain the rapid and aggressive movements of the Third Army, allowing Patton to maintain the pressure on the German forces and continue his advance toward Germany. The success of the Red Ball Express proved that logistics was not merely a support function, but a decisive factor in determining the outcome of military operations. Patton's ability to keep his army well supplied with the help of the Red Ball Express directly contributed to his success on the battlefield and the eventual Allied victory in Europe.